Hey everyone, today's guest is Petey Mangan. Petey is 69 years old and is arguably one of the fittest 69-year-olds on the planet. As shown in the thumbnail, he practices what he preaches in terms of health and fitness and is a wealth of health and fitness related info, which we'll jump into today. So with that, welcome to the channel, Petey.
Thanks a lot, Mike. Thanks for inviting me. And thanks for the kind words.
Yeah, I mean, most people think about 69 and then to look at you, you don't look or sound or act like a 69-year-old. So I think it's great.
Well, great. I mean, it's hard to know what 69 is supposed to feel like. And so I get up every morning, I'm moving around just like normal and here I am. So I don't know. When I think about being 69 years old, I think, wow, how did I get here? But obviously it just happens. So
Yeah, but one of the memes you posted, I think Bill Gates, how old is Bill Gates?
he's he's 68. So
Yeah,
so he's 9 months younger than me or something
yeah.
like that. Yeah.
So that's probably closer to what people think of as 68, 69, rather than the fitness side of it, right? So I want to peel all of the layers back. I want to dig deep into the details, right? So I want to start off with your workout approach, right? So frequency, intensity, duration, even how you go about like workout to workout, which movements to include. Um, do you have standardized? I'm listing like all of the questions right away. So let's take us through a normal workout. So which do you have a set days during the week when you work out?
No, I don't. Generally, currently I'm working out once every 4 days. So the day of the week varies. And if I am not particularly feeling it on a particular day, I do not hesitate to take an extra rest day. So my approach to training is what might be called brief, infrequent, but intense exercise. So one thing here is that, you know, speaking generally, when the public thinks about exercise and so on, is they conflate exercise with physical activity. So when I talk about exercise, I mean training to get fitter. Physical activity is basically anything else that isn't just sitting or sleeping. So as far as the exercise goes, yes, I train about once every 4 days. My workouts last me at the most 30 minutes. When I see the clock on the gym wall and I see that I've actually hit 30 minutes, I know it's time to clear out. Um, so what do I do in these workouts? I'm doing strength training, obviously, but this type of strength training that I do, resistance training, it's known as high intensity training. I'm, certainly not the inventor of it. Um, it involves doing compound exercises. So compound exercises are those exercises that exercise large groups of muscle. Basically, technically, any exercise uses more than one set of joints as a compound exercise. So let's say a chest press is a compound exercise. So I do those and I do them to failure, momentary muscular failure, which means that you do repetitions of the exercise, always in good form, until you get to the point where you can't do another rep. Or even more specifically, you can't even move the weight or resistance anymore at all. When I get to that point, then I'm done. It is one set only of each exercise. Then what I do is I move to the next exercise with minimal rest in between. Basically, I try not to rest at all, but in a regular gym, there's a certain amount of time where you got to go walk over to the next exercise station. Sometimes someone is occupying the one you want, so you got to go find another one, this kind of thing. But the idea is basically little time between exercises. So this part of the training is the, basically cardiovascular component here. So as you get going into this workout, you'll find that you have a pretty elevated heart rate. You're breathing hard through this workout. So you go through the workout this way. Then, so I do the large compound exercises. I do no more than 2 different exercises for each muscle group. So just one set of each exercise, but possibly 2 exercises for a muscle group. My workout varies a little bit depending on how I'm feeling about it that day. Then towards the end of my workout, I might do a few isolation exercises like biceps curls, triceps pull downs, this kind of thing. I always end my workout with a metabolic finisher. So I want to be sure that I have gotten the best cardiovascular conditioning I can out of this workout. Typically, when I'm going through the workout, doing the actual resistance training, my heart rate will be anywhere, when I stop and check after an exercise, anywhere from say 132 up to 144 during the workout. Then when I do the metabolic finisher, and typically what I do for that finisher is I get on a stationary cycle, I put it at a pretty high level of resistance, and I start pedaling until I basically can't continue. And usually that's 20 to 25 seconds, somewhere in there, based on the resistance I put it on. When I get off this metabolic finisher, my heart rate gets pretty close to its maximum. At my age, my calculated maximum heart rate is something on the order of 168. So I get up pretty close to that. So that's my workout. Then I kind of carry myself out of the gym and go home, and that's it.
All right. So the first exercise is what? Like you get there, you're doing the bench press, you're doing deadlift. What's the first exercise you're doing?
Right. So that does vary. Yes, sometimes I will start with deadlifts. So that if one is doing deadlifts, it is a good idea to start with it, because this is an exercise you do with free weights, and your form is very important. A few years back, I was very much into increasing my 1 rep max on the deadlift. So like at one time I've deadlifted over 300 pounds, which for, lots of people do more than that. Don't get me wrong, but for me, it was a lot. But I don't do that anymore. I am very conscious of preventing injury. This is just the most important thing in exercise. You got to just start with this as your basis for exercise. Don't get hurt. That's the #1 priority. Anyway, yes, I often start with deadlifts, and I'll do a set of deadlifts, basically to failure. Failure is a little bit different in an exercise like that, because of what I mentioned. You're using free weights, so you always want to stay in good form. So when I feel like I can't do another one, if my form is breaking down, I stop. Then I might proceed to chin-ups. And again, I'll do those to failure. One thing that I do in most of my exercises is what are known as set extension techniques. So basically, there are 2 of them: drop set and rest pause. In a chin up, since I'm using my own body weight and I can't change my body weight, I use rest pause. So I might get 15 chin ups till the point where I can't pull myself up anymore. Then I'll stop and rest up to about 10 seconds and do another rep. And I'll do that several times. With this other set extension technique, drop set, this is more appropriate if you're working out on a machine, because you can change the weight very easily, usually with a pin. It just takes a second or two. So you get to the point where you can't push that lever or pull, as the case may be, the lever anymore, then you drop the weight, say 10 to 15%, do another rep in good form. I can do that. I might do that several times. So yeah, so then let's say I'll do the deadlifts, I'll do chin-ups, then on a day that I don't start with deadlifts, I might go to the leg press and do a set of those. Then I will do chest press, dips. I'll do an overhead press, machine overhead press, and then maybe also dumbbell lateral raise for the shoulders. Also, chin-ups. Chin-ups are an exercise that works the lats and back muscles, and so I will also do a seated row. Uh, Also works the back. At that point, I've got most of my compound exercises done. So, like I said, it does vary a little bit, but that's basically it. And then I'll go do, say, a set of biceps curls. I like to do shrugs as well. That works the traps. Um, Once in a while, I'll do a set of triceps pull downs, something like that, and then I'll go to my metabolic finisher.
So in terms of so deadlift, for example, you're not it's got to be sub max because you can't be going to failure at, you can't, it's probably not a good idea to jump straight to like 220 or, whatever you're doing work sets at 180. There's got to be some warm up there, right?
Well, yeah, well, yes and no. So you're totally correct about not being a totally a maximal effort on the deadlift because, like I said, I'm very conscious about preventing injury. I don't want my form to break down, and I often will do a warm up, a few warm up reps for the deadlift. However, regarding warm up generally, well, I don't do them for any other exercise. So basically, the idea is that for people do a warm up largely because they want to prevent injury. If they're lifting, a heavy weight, they do a warm up. So everything's in working order, and then they do their main set. The thing is, in my way of training, we're not lifting or moving a weight that on the first rep or two has the potential to injure us, right? So, the stress of or the stimulus to building muscle comes from continued reps and going to failure. So in conventional weight training, you would see a lot of people doing, say, a set of 3 to 5 reps at a pretty heavy weight. And so if somebody can only do a set of exercises, say from 3 to 5 times, they're generally using a pretty heavy weight that has the potential for injury. So I am not doing that.
So then you've got to know what your one rep max is in order to scale it back to have a weight sufficient enough to induce gains, strength and muscle mass gains, while at the same time, being heavy enough to provide that stimulus, right? So you've got to know your one rep max in that deal and then scale it back. So do you know approximately where you're training relative to your one rep
Well,
max?
so actually, I don't.
Hmm.
The way that I do this is that I select a weight, and of course, by now, I'm used to doing this, so I have a pretty good idea of what weight I'm going to use every time I hop on a machine, and I'm always trying to either increase my weight or my reps because I'm always pushing to failure. When you push to failure, you are always training against the limits of your strength. So, at least in theory, you should always be making progress. So, what I do is I try to, I select a weight such that I get to failure somewhere between about 45 and 90 seconds of doing the exercise, anywhere in there. So, if I can't get to 45 seconds, of course, I'm not sitting there with looking at my watch or anything like that,
Yeah.
but I do slow reps.
Yeah.
And so I have a good idea how long each rep takes. And then so I try to do it so I hit failure somewhere between 45 and 90 seconds. If I can't hit 45 seconds, then I'm using too much weight. If I can keep doing it 90 seconds or longer, then I need to add some weight. So I get to failure in less than 90 seconds.
So are you doing that specifically because of ATP, CP, energy metabolism? And if you go beyond, like, you get past 3 minutes, now you're on aerobic metabolism.
Right, right, exactly. When you get up into several minutes of doing this, yeah, it's more like a form of aerobic training than really anaerobic or strength training.
So how many reps is it? I mean, I've seen you do, I think, like 225, 20 reps. I mean, is it you're generally doing 20 reps for each of the compound movements within that 90-second frame?
No, it isn't that many. It depends. Some of the machines that I use seem to be more conducive to slower reps. Others are not. For example, in a seated row where I'm pulling this way, I can pretty easily, just maintain tension and, an 8 second up, 8 second down, 7 or 8 seconds, something like that. Where others, I find myself doing them a bit faster, like let's say a biceps curl, probably no more than 5 seconds up, 5 seconds down, something like that. So it does vary. I don't think there's anything that I do that's as much as 20 reps.
So it's time under tension. It's a combination of reps and time under tension, right? So
Right, right, exactly. It's time under tension. I mean, technically, reps, the number of reps doesn't matter. It's all about time under tension. I mean, I've seen a really, some people, um, believe in very slow reps. And I've seen an interesting video of a guy who was training with Doug McGuff, and his chin up was, I believe it was 60 seconds up, 60 seconds
yeah.
down. So he did one rep, but he was doing that for close to 2 minutes.
Yeah, but then there's like a balance between slow strength and then explosive power, right? So if you're training, I get the time under tension, and time under tension is going to be good for muscle mass and even strength. I wonder how that translates where, if your time under tension at a sufficient load is so great that now you've got real explosive power, or do you need to train explosive power all the time in order to have explosive power, right? So
Right. So as far as resistance training goes, I believe that no one should ever do any explosive movements. So explosive movements, of course, are necessary playing a sport, football or soccer or whatever, baseball, anything that you need these quick explosive movements. And so this points to another distinction. I mentioned between exercise and physical activity. There's also a distinction between exercise and sports. And this is, I mean, somebody might say, well, that's pretty obvious. They're not the same thing. But the thing is that in exercise, for example, I mentioned don't get hurt. That's top priority. Whereas in sports, you kind of you go into playing a sport knowing that, yeah, there are certain risks. You've got to use explosive movements, this kind of thing. Whereas in exercise, I don't believe that explosive movements are necessary, that they shouldn't be done. Now, somebody might point to, let's say, powerlifting. So this obviously involves some pretty explosive movements. But again, or Olympic weightlifting. Again, powerlifting and Olympic lifting are sports. And certainly somebody who trains that way will get stronger and so on, but there are more effective and safer ways of training. And it's my view that the only people who should be doing powerlifting or Olympic lifting are those who want to practice them as a sport. If you want to exercise for strength, no, you shouldn't be doing those.
Yeah, that's an interesting approach. I'm with you on almost everything else, basically compound movements, a circuit training based approach. You're getting the cardiovascular stimulus, only I'm doing it for 90 minutes. I could do it for longer, but the fitness metrics start to look like overtrained all the time and chronic fatigue, which we'll get
Uh,
into that too. But I do include clean and jerk. I do include a little bit of the explosive movements. And whether that may translate into like, the when you think about older age, believe me, I hear you on minimizing injury risk, right? But when you think about older age, it's a loss of, basically explosive movement, right? An older person can't race across the street to get away from a car or a predator, right? So if that's never trained, I imagine, and granted, I like the heavy gorilla, lift it up over my head and press it. I mean, it's like, it's a rush too. So, but I hear you on the
right.
injury risk. Nothing is worse for aging than injury, especially lower back herniated disc from deadlifting and all that stuff.
Absolutely, absolutely. People have life-changing injuries in the gym, and that's something definitely to be avoided.
So no negatives too. You don't do negatives. So
Well, yeah, I do negatives. I mean, on the negative portion of the rep, I go just as slow, so that's a negative. And if I'm on the last rep, I'll try to do a very slow negative. So yeah, I do those.
but at a higher weight. Like for example, if you've maxed out on chin-ups and you can't do any more, sure, you could do a pause and then and do more reps. And I do that too. But then other times or lately, I've been doing negatives where I'll literally jump up and then control the slow down. So I know I've exhausted myself on the concentric and I'm purposely exhausting myself on the eccentric. And I'm sure you know that there's data overloading the eccentric phase can improve the concentric. So no negatives within that phase.
Right. Well, maybe a little bit, but not so specifically like what you're talking about.
Because as you mentioned, you've got to be careful. Too many negatives too often increase injury risk, and then you can't train, and that screws it all up, right? So
Absolutely. And probably, I feel pretty right now, I feel pretty comfortable with the idea that I'm not going to hurt myself in the gym. I've done everything possible, to avoid that. The real a more important risk for me, if you want to call it a risk, is overtraining. And when you overtrain, well, you don't feel so good. And then it takes longer to get back into the gym again, all this kind of thing. So I really definitely try to avoid that. That's one reason when, if I'm working out in the gym and I see that clock on the wall and I've been there 30 minutes, then I know, I bet I just better get out, even though I get very enthusiastic. I want to keep going, but it's better for me if I just stop at that point.
all right, wait, before we go down the overtraining road, so in terms of I've just had something else there on the workouts. Injuries, right? So have you had injuries, tendonitis, herniated disc, lower back, all that stuff? Have you had injuries over the past, I don't know, say 20, 30 years?
I have, yes. I've had tendonitis in my elbows, and that went away pretty easily when I just figured out what was doing it. I stopped doing that, and it just went away. Yeah, I've hurt my back. I don't really know how seriously. I think most of the stuff were, muscle pulls, this kind of thing. I certainly don't have any kind of lingering injury. I've never seen a doctor for any of that kind of stuff. So hopefully I haven't hurt myself too seriously, and I guess even if I did, it's gone now. But yeah, even pulling a muscle, it's painful, and then you can't work out for a while. And yeah, so even something like that, definitely to be avoided.
And then how long have you been on this 30-minute, twice a week? How long have you been on that? And then I know that evolved out of you were a runner. So how long, yeah, how's that evolution been? And do you see that being the same, approach going forward indefinitely?
um Yeah, so to answer the last part first, yeah, this is what I intend to keep doing. Um, my study of high intensity training has convinced me that this is a completely um, adequate, if I want to say, or a legitimate way to improve cardiovascular health that doesn't require, long training runs or long, bouts of whatever it is for cardiovascular stimulus. As far as how that evolved, well, so that takes us into another place. But yeah, I ran for years and years. I've run a couple of marathons in my life. I used to go out and do a lot of distance. Um, and then I was fairly ill for a while. Like I said, this takes us into another thing. We can talk about that if you want. But I was ill and for quite a few years, and then when I started getting better, I decided, well, I'm going to try lifting some weights, and I got into it again. It was pretty tough at first, but joined a gym. So that that's where that started about 15 years ago. And then I trained in a conventional way for I I don't know 6 7 years, something like that, until I discovered high intensity training and switched to that, and I've been doing that ever since.
Nice. So going down the overtraining road. So I guess were there times when it wasn't a 30-minute workout, but it was a 60 or longer, some longer workout, and then you realized, if I go above that 30-minute threshold, don't have a certain amount of days in between, I feel fatigued and all of the symptoms that come with overtraining.
Absolutely. I mean, there were times. I mean, I think even a typical workout back in the day, I might be in the gym an hour and 15 minutes, hour and 20 minutes, something like that. Of course, it wasn't the same in the sense that there was some rest time between exercises, and I was doing multiple sets and all this kind of thing. But yeah, that kind of training um, really kicked my ass. I mean, it was. I just had too many days where I wanted to just sit in my comfy chair and not get up.
Yeah.
So
It's such an ego hit because like I love doing my like I said, 90-minute workouts, and I could do it for even longer. It used to be 3 hours where I would just throw stuff around like a gorilla for 3 hours, right? And like in a circuit-based thing. But that, like you said, the next day I feel like I've, gone out and it's a night of drinking. So it's such an ego hit to have to cut it down. And it, like you, it takes me 3 to 4 days to recover from that. So yeah, it's a big hit.
absolutely.
Yeah, it's a big hit. But I think most people aren't thinking about it like that. It's everyday gym. It's, uh, you know, uh, 10 sets per body part. And then the next day you do a different body part. And I think, so when you think about like, I'm sure the vibe that's all over the interwebs these days of have your VO2 max as high as possible and basically train like an elite athlete to maximize longevity, which ends up being at most like 7 years on average for lifespan. But when you consider that exercise is well known to increase average, but it doesn't get you to the maximal, whether it's in animal models in comparison against calorie restriction or elite athletes and 4-minute milers who get the increase in average life expectancy, but you don't see them at 115 years old. So I wonder
Right.
if overtraining is a component of that equation. It has to be, right? Where exercise gets you that increase in overall general health, but at the same point, even if you're overtrained by some amount, maybe that limits, getting to the maximal and potentially beyond.
Right, right. And I'm sure you've seen those U-shaped curves as far as exercise goes, where, too much exercise is bad. And in resistance training, too much exercise turns out to be not all that much. I mean, there's some studies, these are epidemiological studies, of course, but some studies where, 60 minutes a week in the gym was basically as much as you would want to do. Um, so yeah, you're right about exercise as far as longevity goes. I mean, in animal studies and so on, the exercise just doesn't seem to do all that much for longevity. Certainly increases health span. I mean, it's totally the best thing to do is to do the right kind of exercise and the right amount and everything. Definitely very healthy. But as far as longevity goes, um, yeah, it's not all that impressive. And yes, maybe overtraining has something to do with it. I mean, you see these you've seen these studies where like lifelong distance runners have the scarring on the heart. What do they call that? Late gadolinium enhancement, where they do these imaging studies and they have, their hearts aren't so good, because they've been just really overstressing them for a long time.
Yeah. So what's your and maybe this is a philosophical question. So do you have longevity genetics? Like are your parents still alive or not? How long?
Yeah, so yeah, kind of. So my parents are not alive. No, my mother died just a few years ago at age 99. So yeah, and so her side of the family, there's some long lived. I had a great uncle that lived to be over 100. My father's side, not so much, just sort of normal.
Like
Um,
70-ish?
he was in his 80s when he died, and but without modern medicine, it would have been definitely less.
So what do you have an expectation for how long you expect to live, or is it just a matter of squeeze as much juice from the orange as you can, and wherever that lands is where it lands?
Yeah, more the latter. So, I do think about this. As far as, okay, I'm 69 years old. How much longer could I possibly have? Like very nicely said at the beginning of the show, here, that I don't seem like a 69-year-old
Yeah.
or look like one, not like Bill Gates for sure.
Yeah.
So I think, wow, if I just keep doing this, and honestly, I don't think I feel all that different from what I did 10 years ago, for example. So if I just keep doing this, you know, how long can I keep doing it? Obviously I don't know, but um, when people talk about, um, like, say, living to 120, or you get even more extreme things you hear here and
Yeah.
here and there, right? But when people talk about that, I think, like, at least for myself, I think, nah, that's not going to happen. It's just a matter of doing what I want to do to keep myself fit and healthy. And then, yeah, the chips are going to fall where they may really, you know, I exert as much effort towards this as I can, but then the rest is beyond my control.
Have you seen any performance deficits in the gym? Like, do you know exactly, all right, I'm usually doing 20 reps for deadlifts at this or 15 reps. Like, are you tracking your like strength over time? And have you seen any decrements, or is it pretty consistent for the last, 10, 15 years since you've been focused on it?
Yeah, it's hard to say because, like I said, I used to go for 1 rep max deadlifts, for example, and I don't do that anymore, for the reasons I stated. So I don't know. A few years ago, let's see, so I don't know how long, I don't know, 6, 7 years ago or something. I weighed about 20 pounds more than I do now. And, when I started weightlifting, I was like, okay, I was skinny, and I wanted to put on muscle. I did pretty successfully. I put on muscle rapidly in the course of 6 months to a year when I started training, and I was eating appropriately or maybe inappropriately. Anyway, I got up to about 20 pounds more than I weigh now, and I was still training hard and everything. And I mean, one day I looked at myself in the mirror and I said, hey, don't fool yourself. There's a lot of body fat there. So I deliberately lost weight. Now, did that affect my muscular strength? I don't know. I kept training, obviously, kept eating in the way I thought was appropriate, but maybe it did.
Wait, so that 20-pound weight loss was how many years ago?
Probably 7, 8 years ago, I'd say.
So then within the past 7 to 8 years, would you say strength and performance during your workouts is about the same? I mean, granted, you said you used to do 1 rep maxes, but uh, if there's any way to relate so I'm thinking, if you can maintain strength and performance indefinitely, right? That's a big part of longevity, right? So whereas if you start to see some decrement, then it's like, all right, what can I do to fend this off, and what's underlying that, so
Right, right, right. So as far as I know, no, I have not seen any decrement in performance. That said, I'm terrible at tracking things, unlike you.
oh
Uh,
well.
um, but yeah, so I haven't been able to notice anything. I I really, when I go to the gym, I mean, I'm cranking it, and I do sometimes think that, you know, like, could I please have a little bit better recovery? That's the thing. So, like for instance, today I worked out 2 days ago. Let's see, today's Sunday. So I worked out on Friday morning. Usually 48 hours after the workout is when I'm feeling it the most. So I always would like better recovery, and I, really try to, like I've talked about already, try to control how much work I'm doing in the gym so I don't get into that overtraining state. Like today, for example, I wouldn't say I'm overtrained, but maybe close, where feeling not so energetic and so on. So yeah, but otherwise, I just keep doing it. I think that I can't tell that there's been any diminished strength or anything like that.
That's good news. So then I think you mentioned that you do like just low intensity walking on the other days. And have you played around with, I mean, I can hear people that are saying cold plunge and all these things that are purported to enhance recovery, which I put them in quotes because I'm just not convinced. Because, for me, nothing works better than actual rest. Like, don't stress me with sauna or
Right,
cold
right.
plunge. I need to physically relax my heart rate for everything to get back to normal. So have you experimented with, all right, I'm just not going to leave the house today and see how that impacts, my recovery versus a walk 1 mile, a walk 2 miles. Do you have that in an equation almost, or
Yes, yes, somewhat. There are days when I just say, yeah, I don't think I'll go out for a walk today. Um, Unfortunately, when I do that, it's usually kind of too late. Like, in other words, like I'm just feeling too tired, so I better not do any of that. Um, um, but yeah, so my walking. I mean, I'm not going out and doing the 10,000 steps, for time or anything like that, like some people do. It's more of a casual walk.
yeah,
I think this is an interesting point about physical activity that in my study of this, I think that maybe is unappreciated or underappreciated. I don't know. Anyway, that just the idea of kind of like getting the juices flowing is really important. Um, you know, the amount of physical activity that is conducive to having much lower mortality rates. You saw me post this the other day, is very low.
yeah,
So if somebody goes from sedentary to walking 30 minutes a day, a few days a week, they're getting just massive benefit out of this, health benefit. So, and also, you kind of just briefly touched on this earlier. What you had in your video a couple of weeks ago about VO2 max, and how these so-called elite VO2 max had the lowest mortality, but the elite actually wasn't even all that high. That's something that's attainable by most people, that doesn't require hours and hours of conditioning, exercise conditioning a week.
yeah. And some of that too is, so when you look at I'm okay with the casual walk. I'm doing the same exact thing. Like, it's very low intensity on the non-workout days. My whole workout routine is centered around that, circuit training, compound movement based 90-minute workout. So I'm not trying to kill myself on the other days, even with the recovery and overtraining. There are days, if I didn't have to expend energy on activities of life like commuting to work or parenting, other things that impact stress levels, which can impact recovery. I could do some high intensity stuff on the day after, but even there, I've got to be very careful. It's got to be like less than 10 minutes of like all out sprints. Otherwise, I'm further pushing my recovery to even slower than it usually is. So, but what the point I'm trying to get at is when you look at like published studies on like 8,000 steps a day or 10,000 steps a day on like maximally reducing the all-cause mortality risk, this is generally in people who are, eating poor diets and are overweight. Maybe they need a little bit more. Whereas someone who's really hitting it hard on those recovery days, you don't have to go and walk 3 miles or 4 miles. I don't know. It's just a hypothesis, but there's no evidence in my data, whether it's blood pressure or, lipids, that, ramping it up even higher in terms of duration and frequency for exercise would be beneficial. So
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Yeah, um, right. Even with, um, well, just basically, I'm just repeating your point. Yeah, most of these people are not eating right, and might be overweight and so on, and yeah, you just don't need all that much exercise. I used to try to do. I used to try to intersperse my strength training workouts with some, high intensity interval training. And I mean, almost every time I would just push myself over the edge into, oh man, I'm way overtrained here. Um, so I don't do a whole lot of that anymore. I just, take it on, on my training days, that's it. And then, yeah, the rest of the time, pretty casual stuff.
and let the body recover.
Right.
Cool.
Absolutely.
All right,
Yeah.
so let's transition into diet, right? So the sun, steak, and steel approach. So we got the steel, that's the exercise component. Steak being, a major part of the diet component. So what's a normal diet like, starting from when you wake up to when what time do you wake up? What time do you go to sleep? What's the eating pattern in between?
Okay. Okay. Well, these days I'm getting up pretty early because I coach clients, and some of them they're from all over the world. So like if somebody's in Australia, for example, I mean I talked to an Australian just the other day, and it was 5 a.m. my time, 17 hours time difference. So I'm up pretty early. I drink copious amounts of tea. That's my drink of choice. And sometimes I will do some intermittent fasting. It kind of depends, but I would say generally speaking, uh, I probably wouldn't have anything to eat till I've been up for 5 or 6 hours, something like that. Um, and I eat high protein, and I emphasize protein. At breakfast, I might have something like Greek yogurt, like non-fat Greek yogurt or something like that, or some cottage cheese, or maybe some eggs, that sort of thing. Very similar things for lunch. I try to keep it light. Dinner is typically, yeah, some kind of meat, like a steak with some vegetables, salad, maybe something like that. I have a couple glasses of wine. Um, yeah, and that about covers it. I mean, it's pretty similar from day to day, and I like it.
So your eating window basically starts at some 10 in the morning then, if you're up at 5, so 10, 11,
Yeah, that's fair enough. I mean, it's not the same every day, of course, but yeah, something like that, right?
and then ends at about what time?
Probably before 6 p.m.
So 10, all right, 8-hour eating window. And then on workout days, when do you fit the workout? Is the workout in the morning, afternoon? When do you?
Right, right. I do go early in the morning for, actually a couple of reasons. Well, one, like I just said, I have clients, and if it's on, a weekday, I often have to just squeeze the workout in. And fortunately, because my workouts are short and the gym is only 3 minutes drive for me, that's pretty easy to do. Um, and yeah, and then of course, if I do work out, I'm not going to be fasting afterwards. I get some protein afterwards in some form or other. Um, yeah. So let's see. I don't know. What did I answer the question? Was there something else
Yeah, yeah.
there?
So the workouts are basically in the morning fasted, and then you come home
Right.
and then do you continue to fast after on purpose, or then as soon as you get home, it's get food in the, food in
Right, right, exactly. It's get some food in right after. So yeah, that's what I do.
voraciously, right? I mean, it's I look forward to it after a workout. I've got it ready to go, cooked and everything.
Absolutely. I usually or I often find that weigh a pound or two more the day after my workout because I've eaten so much on workout days. I'm so hungry.
So that's right. You don't, so you're not counting calories at all. It's just completely satiety and
Right,
yeah,
right.
interesting. Wow. I can't do that. I wish I could do that and auto regulate, but unfortunately that doesn't work for me.
Uh-huh. Well, the like I've said to people, the only app that I use in fitness is a scale. So that's basically how I'm judging things. It's interesting too, when I step on the scale, and it kind of gives me um, a general idea of like, am I really hungry? So like if I step on the scale and I'm like a pound or two more than I think I should be, I think, oh, well, yeah, I guess I'm not really very hungry, am I? And then
Mm.
so I'll fast a little bit.
So do you weigh yourself every day? Is that a part of the
Yes,
that's
I do.
interesting. So
Yeah.
if you see the scale weight is a little bit higher that morning, then that's the motivation maybe to eat a little bit less that day.
Right.
Oh, that's
Yes.
interesting.
Yes,
That's interesting.
absolutely.
But you've got to do that over a long enough period of time where it's like, all right, yesterday I had more salt than usual. It's a salt thing. It's not a calorie thing.
This is true. I mean, and especially if I've maybe had a few carbs. I eat generally pretty low carb, but if I've eaten more than usual, and of course, body water comes with eating carbs, and so yeah, usually I can tell what's going on there. Is especially like if we've gone out to eat or something like that, and I've had some things that I don't usually have, and then yeah.
So it's not a never based approach for some of the more quote unquote fun stuff. It's just to limit that stuff as much as possible.
Right, right. Restaurants, like I tell my clients, restaurants are terrible for weight loss.
Yeah.
Absolutely terrible. I mean, in theory, it's possible you go to a restaurant, and if you're really good, you can find something on the menu and stick to the plan and all this kind of stuff. But in practice, you go to a restaurant, you're with friends or family, you have a drink or two, and then it's like, who cares? I'm just going to have whatever I want. So, yeah, restaurants are not good for that.
And they're in the business of like making sure you pay as much as possible by satisfying you as much as possible. So it's going to be hyper palatable, even though it's not ultra processed, right? So
Absolutely.
and
Yes.
that's probably where I think we agree the most is ultra processed foods. Now, granted, I'm not a never on that too, but you've got to be really careful with it to include it at all because if it's frequency if the frequency of ultra processed food is more than a certain amount, now you're messing up the signals between the gut and brain, and you can't turn it off, and you can't auto regulate. So never on UPS for you, or it's a very rare thing.
Yeah, I'd say just very rare. So there are probably few things, not too many things that are just never for me. But something like a dessert, well, that's not strictly speaking ultra processed, but let's say uh but let's say a nice dessert. I mean, I'm probably only having something like that a few times a year.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah.
So that gets to like calorie restriction. Like I don't even know how tall you are. What's your body weight?
So I'm about 5'9" and maybe 5'9.5" on a good day, and I weigh about 150 pounds.
Aha. So you may be some aspect of CR. I mean, BMI, what's that BMI? It's probably like 23-ish.
20. It's above 22, but it's
Yeah.
like 22.3 or something like that. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, so yeah, I've wondered about that myself. If I kind of fall into that category of, I mean, obviously, I'm not restricting calories. For one thing, I'm not doing it deliberately. And for another thing, the people who are doing it deliberately are even, as you know, a lot lighter, like BMI of 19, this kind of
Yeah.
thing. Right. So I'm not anywhere near there. But yeah, I've wondered about that. Does that have something to do? Yeah, I'm in good health, and we talked about, my age and all that kind of stuff. Does this have something to do with it? I do think that I like I said, I'm terrible at tracking, but I look at overall and I think, yeah, maybe I don't really eat all that much.
So maybe in terms of, so when like you said, when you think of calorie restriction, yeah, there are people that are like 18.5 and below, which to me is way too far in the extreme. But
Yeah.
when considering you were 20 pounds heavier, that's a form of calorie restriction that you are able to maintain a 20-pound lighter body weight. So I think there's a pretty good marker. I don't know if you've measured sex hormone binding globulin, SHBG. That's dramatically elevated for people on CR. It's elevated by people who exercise, are frequent regular exercisers, but it's almost double that for people who are on CR. So I don't know if you've measured.
I have, but it's been a long time. So I couldn't tell you what it is currently. I will tell you, so this is an indication. I mean, the last time I had blood work, it's been over a year. But I had a testosterone done, and so I'm sure you know all about the relation between SHBG and free testosterone and
Yes.
so on. My free testosterone was out of range high.
Ah, so that would argue
So
again, yeah, SHBG probably very low.
right,
Ah,
right.
interesting. So probably not CR then. That's
I
interesting. Wow.
Yeah, yeah, I guess.
Yeah, I'm on the other side of that coin right now, where my SHBG is double the reference range. My total testosterone on the last test was very high, like 970, but my free is right on that border of, what's considered low. So I've actually increased my calories by a small amount. Because, uh, free testosterone impacts erythropoiesis, which could impact total levels of red blood cells and hemoglobin. So I've actually started to see a pattern in my data of a trend down for red blood cells and hemoglobin as I've been cutting calories sequentially test over test. So that argues that my current BMI of around 22 may actually be too low. So the people who are on more extreme CR, I can only imagine like I don't know that they're doing it that carefully. So
Right, right. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I've seen in a number of clients who were exercising like mad that they had, low free testosterone, even low total testosterone, high SHBG. I mean, I talked to a young guy. He's like 20, 23, 24 years old or something, and he was saying, "Wow, I can't put on muscle, and what's going on there?" And so I talked to him, and I mean, he was like in the gym 2 hours every day, all week long. I'm like, well, geez, no wonder, your testosterone's low. And yeah,
overtraining, it goes back to the overtrained phenotype, right? So
right.
yeah, and you would think
Absolutely.
that more is better, where you're just moving your body, but yeah. So, all right. So the
Right.
third component, and I should mention for people who don't know, if I were you, I just a suggestion, I'd put it on a T-shirt, Sun, Steak, and Steel. I mean, it's a great model, right? So yeah, so we've got this steak and steel. So the other aspect is sun, which so no sunscreen ever.
No sunscreen ever. But I guess I would have to maybe people get the wrong idea. So it's not like I'm spending hours out in the sun, lying out there every day, nothing like that. It's more like, I mean, I was out there today, lying out a little bit. I was out there for 20 minutes. I mean, it was so all that depends on, time of day, season of the year, all this kind of thing. So I'm not you know laying out hours a day or anything like that. It's more, well, a couple of things. I would say one is that it's more about, don't be afraid of it, like so many people are, that we've been taught to be, oh yeah, if you're going to be out there 5 minutes, you better have your sunscreen on, this kind of thing. The other is that it's more or less shorthand for just get outside, get some fresh air, move around,
Yep.
and yeah, get some sun. So that's what that's all about.
Yeah, so I'm in the same boat. 20 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes. it used to be an hour, and I started to notice some like bleaching, that you get like sunspots that bleach. And I was like, oh, this is too much, which sucks because it's fun to be in the sun. Now, I'm not trying to go the opposite extreme and no sun, but that's dramatically underrated, especially with sunscreens everywhere. My 15-year-old's like, I'm gonna lather up. And I'm like, you need to get sun exposure. We evolved getting sun,
Right.
so even, Brian Johnson probably is the most famous for this, where he's, never getting in the sun, which I mean, that's just disagree with him there, so.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I
And
agree.
I think I've heard you say, but most people are deficient, especially older adults. So, it's potentially hugely important to get that right. So,
Right, right, absolutely. And also, being in the sun, as you know, uh, it does a lot more than just produce vitamin D in the skin. So it increases nitric oxide levels and it has all, these other benefits. And then not only that, usually, I mean, if you're lying in the sun, you're getting some grounding, which I believe in also. So reduces inflammation and so on. So I think those are good. You get into you know the whole marginal benefit thing, like how like if I am who I am, how much benefit am I getting from say grounding every day or something like that. Well, who knows. It certainly can't hurt. The average person could probably get a lot of benefit out of it.
so wait, grounding is basically where you're just bare feet on grass, and then what is it? It's something about the electrons in the ground. I don't know. What's the mechanism?
Right, right. So, yeah, so it's bare feet on the grass, or if you also if you're on concrete that's in contact with the earth, that works as well. And so, what it does, at least one of the main things it seems to do, is yeah, you're getting electrons from the earth, and this increases the zeta potential of red blood cells, and so it lowers blood viscosity, so therefore it improves circulation and then it reduces inflammation as well. There have been studies on this. Now, whether the reducing inflammation part has anything to do with the zeta potential of red blood cells, I don't know. But the zeta potential is important. I mean, if you look up, for example, um, studies about the erythrocyte sedimentation rate and mortality. You find that people who have high sed rates have higher mortality, and it's because their blood, the red blood cells are all just clumping together. So you don't want that to happen. So that anyway, that's one thing at least that grounding does.
So grounding can reduce the ESR, reduce or the zeta potential has to do with if the red blood cells are, I guess they're negative. I don't
Right,
know.
right, right. So the zeta potential is the fact that each red blood cell has a negative electric charge around it. Therefore, they repel each other,
Yeah.
and so grounding increases the zeta potential, and so they have less of a tendency to
Interesting.
stick together.
So is there published data that grounding is associated with reduced all-cause mortality risk? Has that been published?
That I don't think so. I've never seen anything like that.
But it's the hypothesis that it should lead to the less tendency for the red blood cells to clump, less
Right,
clotting, and all the bad stuff that goes with that.
right.
All right, so all right, so since we're on biomarkers, right? So the lean mass hyperresponder, right? So let me pose the situation, right? So you've got someone who's very low carb, and as expected, triglycerides come down, LDL goes up, HDL goes up, right? So you have a low TG to HDL ratio, LDL very high, high total cholesterol. The assumption would be that in that case, someone may improve their metabolic status where now glucose is low, HbA1c is low. But what if that's not the case? What if it's just glucose is over 100, HbA1c close to 6, in conjunction with the lipids being in those directions. So what would you do in that situation?
Well, in that situation, I'd say that person is likely not metabolically healthy. So in a metabolically healthy person, you'd expect to see hemoglobin A1C closer to 5,
Yeah.
and so um, and if they had a high, The LDL part. So this is, I suppose, what's of most interest here. For one thing, it appears that oxidized LDL is the important part of it, that if it's not oxidized, it really doesn't matter. And then, of course, lately they've been getting into all the ApoB stuff. And the same thing goes here because ApoB is a marker of small, dense LDL particles, which are associated with poor metabolic health, metabolic syndrome, and so on. So, I mean, I would expect for somebody to go, for someone that went on a low carb diet to see improvements in all those markers. But in any case, the way you describe it, that's not good metabolic health. And so this is what I believe is the crucial component of cardiovascular risk.
Yeah. So how would I'm not for me, it's not, I mean, I hear you on the LDL, but it's more of, okay, if someone has gone low carb and they see all of the things, and they're not overweight or obese, so how would you improve metabolic health so that they can reduce glucose and reduce HbA1c within the context of going low carb?
Yeah. So, well, of course, one thing is exercise, of course, whether they're doing the right amount of exercise or any exercise at all. Um, People who are of normal weight often have relatively high body fat and low muscle mass. So just the fact that someone is in a normal BMI range doesn't mean that they have good body composition and that they have good metabolic health in that way. And then another thing that I've seen a lot in talking to my clients, and this is not this is not hard to believe, but unfortunately, in my opinion, in ketogenic and low carb diet circles, they promote ingesting a whole lot of fat. And they think that this is basically a free food or harmless or however you want to put it. And so some of these people are in doing massive amounts of fat. I mean, I've had clients, for example, that have come to me and they're drinking bulletproof coffee, for example, and like I think like why would anyone want to do that? I mean, not if you're aiming for weight loss, certainly. Um, so whether all that dietary fat could be involved in having a higher hemoglobin A1C or higher glucose, I don't really know, but it could certainly be a factor in not being able to lose weight, for example, or lose excess body fat.
Is it possible that increasing carbs in that take and in that case, and I don't mean like pastries and cookies and all this other stuff, but like just real food, maybe the fiber helps to, the gut microbiome get involved to reduce, to improve insulin sensitivity. There's published data on that. Like I hear you, there may be people who thrive on low carb, whether it's high fat or not, and then glucose is low, HbA1c is low, and they're not, and they're exercising, but for people who are high, it's a matter of trying to titrate the dose in people who may not, respond to generally, the lower carb diet, where now you've got some other metabolic issues that shouldn't be there. Well, maybe there's stuff in the diet they can change, or maybe
Well,
try to get leaner.
Well, right. So, I'm sure you're probably aware of the paper by Nick Norowitz
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
where he ate Oreos and it brought his LDL from very high way down, and it was more effective for him than when he took a statin. And so, yeah, but I think so. Yeah, so if somebody's on a very low carb diet and they have high LDL, yes, they could potentially bring it down by eating some more carbs. Then this is the lean mass hyper responder phenotype.
But not the LDL side of it. I'm more interested in the glucose, HbA1c, because you're going to get I hear you in Nick's experiment, you're going to reduce LDL, but LDL, maybe it's meaningless. It's within the context of insulin resistance and inflammation that maybe now it's a big player, right? So
Right.
so for the aside from the lipids, like I don't know if I looked at his paper, but I don't know if that it was in there. But did his glucose or HbA1c or insulin levels change when he added carbs?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think
Yeah.
that was in his paper. One thing that happens I've seen this in myself is the so-called dawn effect with blood glucose. So I've gone in and had a fasting glucose done, and it was like 105. And I've seen, like, for example, Sean Baker posted his, this is a few years ago, I think, but yeah, he had, like, it was 120 or something like this. And so the idea here is the dawn effect, the idea that when you get up in the morning and cortisol rises and your blood glucose rises. And this is uh, um, especially happens if people are under stress. And by stress, I don't mean necessarily, something horrific, but just like getting up in the morning, driving off to work, rush, rush, rush. I mean, it's like when I had my 105 glucose, I was working in a clinical lab. And, I had gotten up in the morning, rush, rush, drive off to work, my commute to work, get in the lab. I'm running around in the morning, getting all my work done. Then I finally, after 2 or 3 hours there, I had a break, and I said to one of my coworkers, "Hey, can you, draw my blood?" So obviously I was all this stress.
Yeah.
So maybe that had something to do with it.
Yeah, so HbA1c may be a better measure in that case, right? Because then it would be more reflective of the longer term changes.
Right.
I think Sean rationalized that his insulin levels were low. I think at like 3 milli-IUs, which even in combination with a glucose of 100 would be a low HOMA and
Right.
technically insulin sensitive. But yeah, I too work with clients, so I do have one that where his high fat, low carb diet, basically keto diet, and glucose older than age expected, HbA1c older than age expected, and then it's trying to figure out what can we add in to square the circle there, you know what I mean? So
I think that one, what the resolution to that is, I'm not so sure, but an interesting thing to do would be to get a non-fasting glucose test.
hmm,
And if it's lower than the fasting, then I think you can very probably say that, this fasting glucose is this dawn effect. It's an anomaly, and overall, maybe it doesn't matter.
yeah. All right, so let's shift into probably your most famous biomarker being the iron, dumping iron. If people don't know, you've written 6 books. That's one of them, dumping iron. I get the iron story that it's a part of hemoglobin and red blood cells, but there may be people who aren't familiar. So how would you pitch the iron story in aging?
Okay.
You wrote a paper too that got published. So great.
Right, right. So, um, let's see, where do I start? So, iron is a necessary element for all living things. And as far as human beings go, we have finely tuned iron regulatory mechanisms, hormones, and so on that regulate the absorption of iron from our food. So, at least in theory, if somebody is very metabolically healthy and everything else is right, when people get to a certain level of body iron stores, basically the regulatory system will really kind of shut down the absorption of iron, so you can keep that in fine tune. In practice, many people are not metabolically healthy, and there are sources of iron that we didn't necessarily have before. For example, flour and cornmeal in the United States is mostly iron fortified, and people take multivitamins with iron supplements, and this kind of thing. So the result is that, generally speaking, people's iron level, body iron stores, as indicated by the marker ferritin, rises with age. And this has been shown to be associated with all kinds of ill health and higher mortality and so on. This whole line of reasoning and investigation basically started when the late Jerome Sullivan, several decades ago, was thinking about, well, why do women have such lower rates of heart disease? And, at the time, and for all I know, maybe still now, a lot of people are saying, well, they have estrogen and various things that, prevent heart disease. And he thought, oh, well, gee, women have much, premenopausal women have much lower stores of body iron. Their ferritin is low. And, in middle age, like, let's say between the age of 40 and 50, men have about something like 4 to 5 times the levels of ferritin that women do, and they also have about 4 to 5 times the rates of heart attacks as women do at that age. So that's where it all started. There's been a lot of research. Iron is important, for instance, in cancer. Cancer is a rapidly growing tissue. Anything that is growing requires iron for growth. Um, many tumor cells upregulate transferrin receptors so that they can accumulate a lot of iron. Another side of this evidence is that, and again, this research goes back a few decades, and there's more recent research too, that blood donors have better health than non-blood donors. Now, of course, you run into a big problem there, which is the healthy donor effect, because you got to be healthy to donate blood. And not only that, probably people who don't feel so healthy are not even going to try. But this has been looked at as well. Trying to statistically account for the healthy donor effect is, to see how much of this is real. And it certainly does appear to be real. There was a paper that came out a few years ago that said that, so one thing they do to account for the healthy donor effect is they look at, for example, they compare frequent donors with non-frequent donors. So, this doesn't necessarily count for the whole thing, but at least you're not comparing just blood donors to non-donors. So anyway, they looked at this and found that it was something like every blood donation beyond 2 donations a year was associated with 7.5% lower mortality rate. I think I got that right. So this was trying to account for the healthy donor effect. They've also looked at things like in some countries, people are not allowed to give blood after the age of 65. So they compare current blood donors with former blood donors. And so anyway, that's the whole thing with iron. And so the idea is, oh, and also let me add another part to this. Therapeutic phlebotomy, in other words, bleeding people, bloodletting, does all kinds of good things for metabolic syndrome and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, all this kind of thing. So iron is a very reactive metal, and can cause oxidative stress, does all kinds of bad things. So keeping body iron levels low is in a low normal range, I should say, is the thing to do for good health and longevity.
So it's not just looking at iron by itself, but iron with ferritin, or could you look at iron by itself as a biomarker?
Right. So basically, no, in most cases, you have to look at ferritin. Now, so this brings up an interesting point, because the iron that is causing trouble in the body, that causes damage and so on, is what they would call free iron or labile iron. In other words, this is iron that is not bound by the protein molecule ferritin. So the question is, well, so if you donate blood, for example, you lower your ferritin. Does that but in my book, I use the analogy that, for example, if you look at dynamite, okay, so dynamite is, allegedly, if it's just sitting there, it's all safe, until you do something to it, like, I don't know, light a fuse, whatever they do to dynamite. It's okay, but you wouldn't necessarily want to store a case of dynamite in your house. And so that's the analogy I use with ferritin. So if the iron atoms are locked into the ferritin molecule, then there's no problem. But in practice, this whole system becomes dysregulated. One of the late Dr. Leo Zakarsky, who wrote the preface to my book, and he'd done a lot of work on iron. He talked to me about, for instance, the ferritin molecule can become glycosylated if somebody has high glucose excursions or generally high blood sugar. It can become glycosylated, and then it just doesn't work properly, and it leaks iron. So in that sense, yeah, getting the ferritin down to a low normal level is helpful in that way.
So probably looking at both, right? Not looking at only at iron levels in blood, but also ferritin. Probably measuring both would be a good idea, because if you only have the iron, you don't know the ferritin, and if you only have the ferritin, you don't know the iron, right? So
So if you're looking at serum iron, yes, it does become dysregulated sometimes, but the damage of the iron is going on inside cells. And so this gets really technical into sort of the kind of territory a hematologist would be looking at, iron and transferrin and total iron saturation and all these kind of things. So there are a number of studies that have been done, I don't know, a few decades ago, where they were looking at, what were they looking at? Transferrin, I guess, or iron saturation. But this is just not as, if somebody has a high iron saturation, that generally means they're absorbing too much iron. So like they might have hemochromatosis, or at least, some gene variant that is causing them to absorb too much iron.
interesting. So then maybe it's not just looking at iron as a biomarker and ferritin, but total iron binding capacity, right? Because if that's high,
Right.
then you've got a lot of iron being released from hemoglobin and wherever else it's coming from, and that's indicative of cellular damage. And for whatever reason, whether it's microbes causing it or your cells are just dysfunctional, right? So
Right. Right.
interesting. Wow. Yeah. So what I didn't even think I was going to bring in microbes into it, but do you think microbes, when considering gut leak, um, there could be a blood microbiome that maybe just overgrowth during aging? Do you think that that's a component in the iron equation, since microbes compete with human cells for iron, where
Yeah, that's interesting. And I'm not sure. I only have an idea or two about that. One thing that I found so interesting was, recently I learned this is so two genera of bacteria that are generally considered probiotic, namely Lactobacillus and Bifidobacterium, do not require iron at all. They are like one of the very few species, genera, life forms, whatever we want to call it, that do not require iron. And it seemed curious to me that the fact that they don't require iron and they are considered healthy for the gut, is that related? Um, One thing I could say is that, as far as the gut goes, well, the liver is the first organ to, to see basically see the contents, what's coming in from the gut. And of course we get, fatty liver and cirrhosis and things like that. Iron is involved in that. Definitely, it's free iron, of course. Um, an interesting thing, kind of as an aside, you know, a lot of people don't know this, but being on Twitter, I'm sure you do, you see all the stuff about seed oils,
Yeah.
right? And what they're doing, and as far as they polyunsaturated fats are very reactive molecules and lead to oxidative stress, molecular damage, and so on. So what's going on there? Well, at least in many cases, it appears to be it's a combination of polyunsaturated fats and free iron. The free iron is reacting with the polyunsaturated fats to create this problem. This is exactly you know about this too, lipofuscin. This is the so-called age pigment that builds up inside lysosomes and just basically totally messes up the cell. It's been called the garbage catastrophe of aging because it's garbage that the cell can't get rid of. What's lipofuscin made of? It's made of polyunsaturated fats and iron,
Mm.
and then it messes up the protein molecules and then just forms all this junk. And so it's, yeah, iron and polyunsaturated fats. That's what causes the buildup of lipofuscin.
So microbes potentially playing a role in that process outside of the lactobacillus and bifidobacteria. Um, so
Yeah,
for example, if, like in the gut, if there can be like the degradation of the mucus layer. So now the bacteria can get into
right.
the epithelial cells. So could there be a situation where the microbes had infected a cell and it's inside the cell? And maybe that's a part of autoimmunity. I mean, this is speculation, right? But could there be a process where microbes are competing for iron and then there's cellular damage as a result? Iron is released as a part of that process, which then is a cascade of horrors for the body, right? So
Right. So yes, for one thing, well, what's interesting is that yeah, so all bacteria, microorganisms, apparently, other than lactobacillus and bifidobacterium, all require iron. And if we're talking about pathogenic bacteria that invade the human body, iron is absolutely the limiting element for their growth. They absolutely have to have iron. So they have developed ways to acquire iron, and we have developed ways to withhold it from them. This has been called an evolutionary arms race, where it, like our transferrin molecules, for example, have grown to become ever to hold iron ever tighter and tighter and tighter, so that bacteria can't get them. And then the bacteria or other microorganisms have developed ways like siderophores. So these are, that the proteins and that they secrete into their environment that grab iron. Um, so whether that's well, another thing is that when people are critically ill or they have severe injuries, that this can lead to the release of free iron, and then you have the bacteria or other microorganisms swooping in because they've got all this free iron, and then you see infections and so on. Whether that dynamic has anything to do with disordered iron metabolism, as most people would experience it, I couldn't say.
yeah, I don't know. That's the next step in this evolution of the story, right? Are microbes causing it?
Right,
Causing the leak, but who knows, right? So,
right,
all right. So
right.
what would if you had to change parts of your approach, what if you had to go back and tell your younger self, what would you change? Like in two ways. One, the pre-runner, the listening to mainstream health advice, because I was brainwashed by that nonsense too. Eat low fat. I was going 10% of my total calories. And it wasn't until I started tracking diet and looking at correlations was like, oh man, that's not true at all. That's actually terrible for, a lot of biomarkers. Um, so in two phases, like I guess before you had that awakening, before you unplugged, and I heard you say, red pill. The red pill also was in total recall, right? So we got to
Uh-huh.
be careful. We got to be careful about people throwing around red pills because maybe people saying the red pill stuff, maybe trying to throw, a blue pill disguised as a red pill. But anyway, and so in two parts with the pre, basically autodidact, which I have the greatest respect for at that level of thinking, which I think you are in that boat, and very few people are. Unfortunately, I hope that more people would be on the self-taught, road. So before the runner, the PD runner, and then over the past, say 10 years since you've been more on this track. So are there things that you would change and you wish you changed earlier on relative to now?
Well, yes. I wish I had been training the way I am a long time ago. That said, I really did enjoy running. I mean, there's something like when you go out and run 10 miles, and when you get into it, it's just this feeling. It's euphoric.
Yep.
So I really did enjoy that, but I don't think it's the best way to exercise anymore. Um, what I really wish that I had done differently was um, not gone near any of that vegetarian vegan nonsense. Um, Protein, and particularly animal protein, is just so important, and generally speaking, vegetarians and especially vegans don't get enough. And I practiced both of those for a while because, yeah, I believed all the mainstream stuff. Oh, don't have saturated fat, it's going to clog your arteries and kill you. And heart disease, you asked me earlier about my family. Well, my dad's side of the family, heart disease runs in the family. They all had it, including my father. And so this was always a big concern of mine. Like, shit, I don't want to get that.
Yeah.
So this was the message coming down from mainstream media or mainstream health sources that, you should don't eat red meat, don't, or don't eat meat at all. That's even better. I listen to these. It's like I'm almost embarrassed to say now. I listen to people like Dr. John McDougall, who was advocating this vegan diet and so on. So that would probably be the main thing that I wish that I could change. Well, here's another one. I just thought of something else. I smoked cigarettes for 15 years.
Yeah, I've heard you say that. That's crazy.
Yeah, right. At the time, I mean, every God, I just like when I was say around 20 years old, everybody smoked. And it was kind of this thing about like, well, yeah, they're telling me it's bad, maybe I should cut back, or this kind of thing. And of course, eventually I quit. But when I look back on that now, wow, lighting tobacco on fire and inhaling it into your lungs, like, wow, that's pretty crazy.
How
Uh,
long? How long did you smoke for?
about 15 years.
Oh man, how many cigarettes a day?
Well, so it wasn't all that many. I mean, probably even at my heaviest, it was half a pack, and then towards the end there, it was more like 5 or 6 cigarettes a day, that sort of thing.
But that
And
was 35 years ago or so.
yeah, so I probably started, about age 16, and probably smoked till I was 30, 32, somewhere in there.
So what motivated you to quit?
Just health. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was just talking about my dad who had heart disease. Well, he was a smoker. He was also a doctor. Back then, even the doctors smoked. And so it was just totally normal, in the environment. But then, yeah, eventually the messages started getting through to me, and I thought, yeah, okay, I better not do this.
So my mom smoked when she was pregnant with my brother and I. So that's, crazy, just like literally crazy. I can't imagine.
Yeah, yeah, right, right.
So
Yeah.
advice would be don't go vegan, don't go vegetarian, and don't smoke back then. That's what you would change.
Right, right. Don't smoke. I mean, the message not to smoke cigarettes is, of course, everybody
Yeah.
recognizes that now, but it was at the time, I guess it was just so common. I guess it was just less appreciated. Smoking was so common that that message wasn't appreciated.
Have you tested lung function since then?
I have. For some reason, I was having some kind of problem, medical problem. This would have been over 15 years ago or something. And I went in, and so they gave me a chest x-ray and they said, why don't you go get this lung function test? So I did that. And they told me I was in the top 1 percentile for my age.
Nice. All right. So
So
yeah,
it's like, okay, I'll take it.
yeah. All right. So it wasn't that much of a negative, right? Where
Yeah,
it
yeah,
persisted. Yeah. So that's good news. All right. I'm
right.
all out of questions. Anything that we didn't cover that we could have covered, should
Uh,
cover?
uh, Not that I can think of. I think we covered a lot here.
Cool. All right. Thanks, PD.
Uh,
Until next time.
well, thanks a lot, Mike. It was great talking to you. Thanks for having me.
Same. All right. Ciao.
Okay. All right. Ciao. Bye.